Today, a continuous stream of information bombards us from our screens. Thousands of analysts, geostrategists, and political scientists confidently discuss what lies ahead. They all try to paint a picture of tomorrow, predicting the movement of borders and the fates of entire nations. This is a natural desire. Everyone wants to look beyond the horizon and know what the future holds. However, there is one nuance that is impossible to ignore if you follow this information noise closely. Practically all of these predictions are wrong. Loud statements by experts holding advanced degrees and heading prestigious institutes crumble to dust time and again when they collide with reality. They often utter such nonsense that it becomes embarrassing even for an outside observer. Recall how, quite recently, authoritative gurus declared with absolute certainty the imminent closure of the Israel Project and the mass migration of its residents to the lands of Ukraine. But reality had other plans. Nothing was closed. On the contrary, conflicts are only flaring up with renewed vigor, engulfing neighboring territories. Geopolitics follows its own path, completely disregarding the predictions of credentialed specialists. This raises a legitimate question. Why are people who have dedicated their lives to studying history and politics so blind in their forecasts? Why don't their models work? The answer lies not in a lack of intelligence, but in the foundation of their knowledge. You cannot build a correct forecast based on distorted data. If you study the past through textbooks written by specially trained people, if you analyze historical fables and approved narratives, then you are studying a fictional world. And by analyzing a fictional past, it is impossible to draw correct conclusions about the real future. To see the true picture of what is to come, one must cast aside illusions and turn to real facts, no matter how incredible they may seem at first glance. Everything happening now has happened before and is part of a single grand design. Modern geostrategists fail precisely because their theories rely on a false chronology and fictional events. We are living inside a global script that is being realized before our eyes, and this plan, which can be called the Biblical Project, was launched a long time ago. However, the concept of long ago here is quite relative. Official science claims that Homo sapiens has existed for tens of thousands of years. But if we discard stories about vanished ancient civilizations and look at our specific species, a shocking truth is revealed. Our species, which could initially be called not just Homo sapiens, but Homo GMO, as an artificially created social species, appeared on Earth only a few hundred years ago. All real, not invented history confirms that humanity as a social phenomenon has a very short biography. Understanding this fact provides the key to unraveling modern events. If you look at what is happening through the prism of this great plan, the apparent chaos acquires a strict logic. You begin to understand why store shelves are filled with fake chemical food, why classical education is being systematically destroyed worldwide, and why a new ethic and a specific rainbow agenda are being so persistently promoted in Europe and America. These are not system glitches or someone's stupidity. These are sequential stages in the implementation of a strategy in which we are all participants. This plan contains several key chapters, and to understand where we are now and what awaits us tomorrow, we need to sequentially analyze each stage of our species' development, starting from the moment of its true, not mythical, appearance. Only in this way, by discarding the usual dogmas about thousands of years of history, can we see reality without distortion. The first and perhaps most fundamental chapter of this global design can be designated by one capacious word: creation. The concept itself, which in modern language often carries a dismissive connotation, originally had a completely different, sacred meaning. We are all creations, particles of a higher design, created for a certain purpose, the essence of which has not yet been revealed to us. However, the key question here is not theology, but chronology. When exactly was this process launched? If we discard the usual school textbooks and look at the dry facts of social development, the date of our species' settlement on Earth shifts from misty millennia to a tangible past, just a few hundred years ago. The most convincing proof of humanity's youth is not archaeological finds, which are easy to fake or misinterpret, but the basic psychological settings inherent in our species. We are talking about fundamental concepts such as compassion, humanism, and, most importantly, love for children and one's neighbor. Official history tries to convince us that man has possessed these qualities throughout his evolution. But real documents and chronicles paint a completely different, frightening picture. These default settings were activated in humanity only in the second half of the 19th century. Think about a simple yet staggering fact. The world's first Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children appeared only in 1875. Before this date, which can be considered a turning point in the history of our species, humanity for some reason did not think about the systemic protection of its own offspring. Moreover, societies for the protection of animals in many countries arose earlier than organizations designed to protect children. This chronological paradox cannot be explained from the point of view of classical history, which counts thousands of years of cultural development. Is it possible that over dozens of centuries of the existence of great empires and civilizations, it never occurred to anyone that children need protection and special treatment? Skeptics will surely argue, citing the works of ancient philosophers, Greek thinkers, and Roman humanists who supposedly reflected on love and virtue 2,000 years ago. However, if we view history critically, it becomes obvious that these treatises are nothing more than late literary forgeries created to age the chronology. There is a huge abyss between high-minded words written on paper and real social practice. Until the middle of the 19th century, the attitude towards humans, and especially towards children, was purely utilitarian. Children were not perceived as full-fledged personalities. They had no rights, and the very concept of childhood in the modern sense was absent. This leads to the only possible conclusion. Humanity as a social species began to mature quite recently. The entire period up to the end of the 19th century was a time when the biological form already existed, but the software, morality, ethics, empathy, had not yet been installed or was in the beta testing stage. We were, in essence, raw material, a blank that was just preparing to become what we call civilized society today. The creation chapter implied the physical placement of the species and the beginning of the formation of its emotional intelligence. The creator, or the architects of this project, were in no hurry. They introduced new behavioral protocols gradually, observing how such alien concepts as mercy took root in the biological machine. Thus, 1875 and the entire end of the 19th century are not just dates on the calendar, but markers of the launch of humanity. But creating a physical shell and even awakening primary emotions is only a small part of the task. Imagine millions of individuals who can already feel, but absolutely do not understand where they are or how the surrounding world works. Their consciousness is clean, like a blank sheet. Each individual sees reality in their own way, chaotically and disjointedly. For the successful functioning of a global system, this is not enough. An empty mind needs structure. It needs a unified, understandable, and alternative-free picture of the world. It was necessary to upload identical ideas into the heads of millions of people in the shortest possible time. What a state is, a nation, borders, and even what shape the planet they live on has. The task seemed impossible. How to synchronize the perception of reality among huge masses of the population in a single generation without the internet or television? The architects required an instrument of colossal power, capable of rewriting individual perception and replacing it with a collective illusion, which would subsequently become the only truth for everyone. And such an instrument was found. The second chapter of the global plan, following physical creation and the initial tuning of empathy, was named Cognition. This was a critically important stage, beginning in the mid-19th century, the goal of which was not merely the transfer of information, but the literal installation of a unified picture of the world into the consciousness of millions. The creators of the new reality needed to explain to their creations where they were, how this world is structured, and by what rules it functions. The human brain is an incredibly complex device, prone to creating its own unique interpretations. If you simply tell a group of people about a distant country or a complex mechanism, everyone will imagine their own image, and as a result, society will turn into a chaos of individual hallucinations. The project managers required standardization. They needed to ensure that the picture of reality in one individual's head matched the picture in their neighbor's head by 80%. To realize this ambitious task, grandiose cities of cognition, known to us as World's Fairs, were deployed all over the globe. Official history presents them as fairs of industrial achievements and a celebration of trade, but their true function was much deeper and more sinister. These were giant training grounds, stage sets for programming the collective mind. Tens of millions of visitors flocked to these exhibitions, organized in all key territories of future development. People entered with disjointed ideas about life and left with a clearly flashed database. It was in these luxurious pavilions, erected with incredible pomp, that the necessary matrix of perception was formed. The average person passing through the halls received a complete visual package of what should be considered the norm. They were shown that the Earth is a sphere by demonstrating huge globes. The political structure of the world was explained to them. Here are different countries. Each has its own flag, anthem, nation, and borders. They were instilled with an understanding of technology. Here are steam locomotives, machine tools, and engines. They work this way and no other. Here, too, social roles were established. How a policeman, a doctor, a worker, or an aristocrat should look and behave. Venetian gondolas and Viking boats floated in artificial ponds, creating an illusion of deep and diverse history. The visitor's brain greedily absorbed these images, accepting them as absolute truth. Thus, individual fantasy was replaced by a controlled, unified reality. The scale of spending on these events staggers the imagination. Whole cities with palaces and complex infrastructure were erected in a matter of months, functioned for a short time fulfilling their role as a programmer, and were then ruthlessly demolished. This seemed like wastefulness only at first glance. In reality, it was an investment in humanity's software. By the 1930s, the need for such expensive stage sets began to fade. The project moved to a new technological level. The baton was passed to cinema. Cinema became the perfect tool for maintaining and correcting the already created picture of the world. If an exhibition required building buildings and transporting people there, now it was enough to hang a white sheet in any rural barn and start a projector. The saying that, of all the arts, cinema is the most important for us, acquired a sinister technical meaning. Through the screen, it was possible to synchronize the consciousness of billions of people simultaneously, and with minimal costs. Cinema allowed not just showing the structure of the world, but also modeling behavior, dictating fashions, and forming images of enemies and friends, love and hate. In every corner of the planet, from metropolises to remote villages, the same version of reality was uploaded into brains, making humanity manageable and predictable. By the middle of the 20th century, the cognition chapter was successfully completed. Humanity was trained, socialized, and brought to a common denominator. People knew how their world worked, believed in the history drawn for them, and followed the established rules of the game. However, simple obedience was not enough for the next leap. A unified gray mass is good for stability, but it is incapable of breakthroughs. To create nuclear reactors, space rockets, and computing machines, not just executors were required, but creators with a unique spark. The biblical project needed geniuses capable of unraveling the mysteries of matter and energy. And then the architects launched the third, perhaps the most complex and ruthless chapter of their plan. A system designed to separate the wheat from the chaff and find those few who could move progress forward. The era of the Great Sorting began. With the completion of the reality installation phase, when cinema and exhibitions had successfully unified the worldview in the minds of billions, the architects of the biblical project moved on to the third, perhaps the most resource-intensive and technically complex chapter. This stage, which unfolded in full force at the beginning of the 20th century, received the codename sorting. While the previous phases concerned everyone without exception, forming a compliant mass, now the task became more complicated. It was necessary to extract from this mass those few who possessed the true gift of a creator. For this purpose, a system of universal, free, and, most importantly, fundamental education was introduced in specially designated territories that can be called zones of advanced development, primarily in the Soviet Union, North America, and Germany. Many still naively believe that the goal of the Soviet or classical German school was to educate a harmoniously developed personality or raise the general cultural level of the population. This is a beautiful myth. The true goal of this giant machine was completely pragmatic. It worked like a great sieve. To find a genius physicist, chemist, or engineer, you cannot simply ask people who wants to become one. Every person has a unique neural firmware, an innate talent that slumbers until it meets the right stimulus. The creator, having endowed everyone with a destiny, forgot to leave instructions. And the only way to reveal this hidden potential is to pass millions of children through a rigid, excessive, and for the majority, painful learning process. That is why the school curriculum was saturated with disciplines that the average person would never need in real life. Why does a future salesperson, driver, or clerk need to know the basics of mathematical analysis, cram the molecular chains of organic chemistry, or understand quantum mechanics? For 90% of school children, these lessons were real information torture, a senseless waste of time and nerves. But for the system, this was a necessary price. This overload worked as a resonance test. The system bombarded the child's brain with complex concepts in the hope that one of them would trigger a response. Among millions of bored students were those same 10% whose eyes lit up at the sight of elegant formulas or chemical reactions. Their brains suddenly recognized their purpose. For them, it was not torture, but a moment of truth, the awakening of a sleeping talent. It was these few who passed through the first, largest sieve of school who were sent to the next level, institutes and universities. Higher education became a finer filter. In the Soviet Union, for example, there were thousands of research institutes where millions of employees worked. From the outside, it seemed that this system was inefficient. Huge staffs, low salaries, many people simply shuffling papers. But within the framework of the global design, it was justified. In this nutrient medium, among millions of merely capable engineers, those hundreds of geniuses matured, whose brains worked at the limit of their capabilities. The result of this colossal separator exceeded all expectations. The 20th century became a century of unprecedented technological explosion. Nuclear icebreakers and power plants, man's exit into open space, the creation of semiconductors, breakthroughs in medicine and fundamental physics. All these are the fruits of the work of those selected few. The technological foundation on which all modern civilization stands, from the internet to the microchips in your phone, was laid precisely then. Everything we use today is just the refinement and commercialization of discoveries made in the era of the Great Sorting. The system squeezed the maximum out of human material, obtaining the necessary knowledge for the complete restructuring of the world. And here we come to the turning point that explains the oddities of our time. By the end of the 20th century, the task of the sorting chapter was fully accomplished. Scientific and technical progress reached a saturation point where further fundamental breakthroughs became unnecessary to ensure the comfortable existence of the species. Already today, accumulated technologies are enough to build a real paradise on Earth, to provide everyone with free energy, food, heat, and housing. Technically, communism, or a golden age, is possible right now. New Einsteins and Mendeleyevs are no longer required on an industrial scale. The knowledge base is complete. So, what do smart managers do with a tool that has fulfilled its function and become too expensive to maintain? They turn it off. That is why we are observing the widespread degradation of education, its transformation into a service sector, and the replacement of fundamental knowledge with a set of competencies. The Great Sieve is being dismantled as unnecessary. But along with this arises a far more terrible question. If the technologies for paradise already exist, but no one is building paradise, and the mass generation of creators has ceased, then what fate is prepared for the billions of people remaining on the planet? We are entering the fourth, final, and most cynical phase of the biblical project, where the rules of the game change radically. Now, it is not about finding the best, but about the quiet disposal of the surplus. With the arrival of the new millennium, we found ourselves in a completely different reality, which many sense on an intuitive level but are afraid to articulate. If in the 20th century the system's goal was to identify the best minds to create a technological basis, today, when this basis is built, the vector of global management has turned 180 degrees. We have entered the fourth, concluding chapter of the biblical project at this stage, which can be characterized by the term culling. This explains the strange paradox where, given all the opportunities for prosperity, we observe widespread degradation of education, stagnation of fundamental science, and the erosion of cultural norms. An attentive observer will notice that the 21st century is so rich in technologies discovered and implemented in the previous era that humanity could already be living in conditions of actual communism today. Automation, energy, agrotechnology, all this allows for easily feeding the entire population of the planet, providing everyone with free electricity, heat, and housing. There are enough resources and knowledge to build paradise on Earth. All mechanisms for a happy and secure life have already been tested and are ready for work. However, this scenario is not being launched. An order from above for general welfare has not been issued, and, apparently, will not be. Instead of a golden age, we have been offered a global survival test, a kind of exam for the right to transition into the future. The mechanics of this stage differ radically from everything that came before. People are no longer driven into the necessary channel by the whip. They are not forced to study under threat of expulsion, and they are not mobilized for great construction projects. On the contrary, the pressure has been completely lifted. The Culling chapter is implemented through the provision of absolute, intoxicating freedom of choice. This is not a war of bombs and rockets. It is a silent war of temptations, where the battlefield becomes the consciousness of every single individual. Humanity has been allowed to relax, but thousands of traps have been embedded in this relaxation, each leading to a genetic dead end. A great separation of the wheat from the chaff is taking place now, and the instrument of this separation is daily choice. Every person is offered a menu of surrogates. You walk into a store and you have a choice: buy natural products or beautiful packaging with chemical contents that slowly destroy the organism. You are offered leisure. Engage in the development of body and spirit, or immerse yourself in the stupor of soft drugs, vapes, hookahs, and endless consumption of digital content. But the most important filter is installed at the level of basic biological instincts and procreation. The information space is oversaturated with ideas that lead to the termination of the family line. Child-free propaganda, the blurring of the concept of family, aggressive feminism claiming that a woman does not need a man, and of course, the ubiquitous rainbow agenda. All these are not just fashion or a struggle for rights. These are instruments of soft sterilization. A person is told, "You are free, you can choose any identity, you can live only for yourself." And he who yields to this temptation, who chooses the path of least resistance and maximum hedonism, automatically crosses himself out of the book of life. He will live, perhaps, a fun but biologically meaningless life and will leave no offspring. His genetic line will be interrupted. This is the cynical but flawless logic of the 4th chapter. No one needs to be destroyed forcibly. The weak, the suggestible, those incapable of critical thinking and distinguishing good from evil will cull themselves. They will voluntarily choose surrogate food, surrogate relationships, and surrogate values, thereby freeing up living space. Only the frost-resistant seeds will remain. Those who, despite mass propaganda and the availability of vices, can preserve clarity of consciousness, commitment to traditional family values, and a healthy biological essence. Thus, the biblical project, despite its apparent cruelty, is ultimately fair. It works as an evolutionary filter tuned to new environmental conditions. The future belongs not to those who shout loudest about their rights, but to those who are capable of continuing their lineage and passing on an undistorted picture of the world to their descendants. We are living in the era of the Great Culling, and the outcome of this stage depends not on governments or corporations, but on the personal choice of everyone, made here and now.